Hi everyone, Agnes here. I'm going to read you a wonderful manifesting a house mortgage-free success story. It's from a couple called Kim and Greg, and they are people that I met in Sydney, Australia years ago when I was working in a shop. So their story goes like this. I met Kim and Greg on a quiet day in the homewares store in Sydney that I was working in. They came in and were looking around, but I noticed something unusual. Kim was at the counter waiting for Greg. He was the one interested in homewares and she was waiting for him. That was really unusual because I see hundreds of couples every week and it always was the other way around. I mentioned that to Kim and she said that he was better at decorating than she was and that she knew that and she let him do it. I then served some other customers and went to see them at the front of the shop when I was free, where they were looking at something else, and they told me that they had just bought their first house in their late 50s and that they were really excited. I instantly liked these two, and I was grateful that the shop was quiet, so I could talk to them. They told me they had been missionaries their whole lives and they'd moved around China, India, and lots of other places. Approximately 35 houses they had lived in. They had 10 kids and they did this work because they were passionate about it. They lived on a shoestring, but they trusted that God would supply what they needed and they continued to do what was in front of them. In 1988, when they first started to have a desire to own a house of their own, Greg said that many of their missionary friends were renting, and that was common amongst people that did this work. He described to me how he and Kim would look at real estate windows and pretend they were going to buy this house and that house and no, not that one, and they made a game of it. They treated each house that they lived in as their own. Every time they moved, they would leave the house that they were renting in a better state that they found it in. They were both visual people, and so they would lovingly paint and improve wherever they could. And even though they were only renting, they still did their best. Kim and Greg would both pray and ask for guidance constantly, and they told me that as they did this missionary work, they would be provided for. They did this work because they loved it, not because they wanted to earn brownie points from God or get a house. It just wasn't like that. Kim's father, at the age of 92, passed away in late 2009, and he left his home in Sydney to his 3 children. Kim and Greg had moved in and spruced it up to make it more presentable for sale. They prayed for the right buyer and a smooth sale, and before the house went to auction, a buyer offered well above the reserve, and they accepted the offer. Kim received her share of the sale, and then they looked around for what they could afford. They decided they didn't want a mortgage, so they looked around as to where they could buy a house outright. The Blue Mountains area in New South Wales was too expensive, so they looked out of town a bit further, out in a place called Portland. There they could buy a house outright. They had been looking near the coast, but as they prayed, they got the message, "You are not my sea change people, you are my tree change people." And that was when they abandoned the coast and went to look at non-coastal places. They looked on the internet, looked at a few houses, and then they saw this house in Portland, and they liked it. Greg told me that he had a dream where he saw himself getting a key out from under the doormat and opened the front door, and it was then that he knew it was this house. He also told me that the house reminded him of a childhood house that seemed to solidify the decision as well. They prayed again. This time the prayer went something like this: "If this is our home, please knock out any other buyers." There were 2 other buyers. One couldn't get the money fast enough because they still had to sell their home, and something else knocked out the second buyer. So the house was theirs. Greg told me that they prayed for a smooth transaction with the real estate and the solicitors, and that's exactly what happened. The agent even commented that it was the smoothest transaction that he could ever remember. Kim had the hunch to look at more houses, and Greg commented to his wife, "What for?" But Kim's hunch was strong, so they did, and what occurred from that exercise was the realization that the house that they bought was far better than what they looked at after the purchase, while they were waiting to move into their home that they had just bought. So, with confirmation from listening to the inner voice, they have peaceful hearts. They bought a wind chime from my shop on this day for the house, and when I saw them that day, they were going to their new home in Portland. They had just moved in 2 days before. I laughed as Greg commented, "What else can go right?" He said that he had seen a rainbow and that statement had come to him. I love that because so often we comment the opposite. What else can go wrong? And that is the sentence we hear all too often. So what else can go right? Greg told me a Bible quote that I think really sums up this whole story. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will bring your desires of your heart. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will bring you the desires of your heart. And this story about these two beautiful people shows that in this case it is true. It's a bit hard to judge the exact time frame of this story. Greg said the desire was not that strong in 1988, but was a gentle desire, and it grew stronger as the years went by. But they were at peace with it because they had faith and trust in God. They bought the house in 2010, so 22 years to manifest? Well, kind of, but the desire is this story was gradual, so it's a bit different to a desire that's intense in nature. They did God's work, they allowed God to look after theirs, and that's what they told me. Lovely. So thank you, Kim and Greg, for sharing that story. And I did have the wonderful pleasure of going to stay with them in this house. Probably about 6 months after they'd moved in, I drove out there and went to visit them. So it was then that they told me this full story so that I could share it in my book. So for those of you that are looking to manifest a home, I will put the Dream Home playlist down below. There's also some meditations in that playlist for you. And I would love to hear your comments about your own house manifestations down below. And thank you for listening to this story. I will put the link to this book down below as well. It does come in ebook, audiobook, and also hard copy. So lots of love, everyone, and I will see you in the next YouTube.